The 5 most horrifying human medical experiments in history. Throughout history, the pursuit of scientific knowledge has often been shadowed by ethical breaches. While medicine has undoubtedly advanced humanity, some experiments have crossed moral boundaries, leaving behind scars of unimaginable suffering. This video delves into 5 of the most horrifying medical experiments conducted on humans, shedding light on their harrowing nature and the lessons we must never forget. 1. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study. In the American South, a chilling story of deceit and cruelty unfolded over 4 decades. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study, orchestrated by the U.S. Public Health Service, targeted 600 impoverished African-American men in Alabama, 399 of whom unknowingly carried syphilis. These men were lured with promises of free medical care, meals, and even burial insurance. But what they received instead was a betrayal of their humanity. The researchers deliberately withheld the diagnosis of syphilis from the participants, dismissing their symptoms as vague bad blood, a term the men were too uneducated to question. While the disease ravaged their bodies, causing blindness, organ failure, dementia, and excruciating bone pain. These men were left untreated to document the horrors of the illness as it advanced unchecked. Perhaps the most horrifying aspect came after penicillin was discovered as a cure in the 1940s. The researchers knew this life-saving treatment could end the men's suffering, yet they systematically denied them access. Worse still, some men were falsely informed they were receiving treatment while doctors secretly monitored their deterioration. The ripple effects were devastating. Many participants unknowingly passed the disease to their wives, and tragically, some mothers gave birth to children with congenital syphilis, leading to deformities, stillbirths, and lifelong health complications. The study's architects justified these atrocities in the name of science, even as families and entire communities suffered generational consequences. When the truth was finally exposed in 1972, the revelations sparked nationwide outrage. The survivors, some still alive and suffering, were left with little more than apologies that came too late. This study remains one of the most egregious violations of medical ethics in American history, serving as a haunting reminder of what happens when prejudice and unchecked power invade the medical field. 2. Unit 731. Deep within occupied Manchuria during World War II, Japan's Unit 731 conducted some of the most gruesome human experiments ever recorded. Officially known as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Guangdong Army, Unit 731 was a front for nightmarish biological and chemical warfare research. Under the command of General Shiro Ishii, thousands of prisoners, Chinese civilians, Korean nationalists, Russian POWs, and others became victims of unspeakable horrors. The experiments defied all notions of humanity. Prisoners were deliberately infected with deadly diseases such as bubonic plague, cholera, and anthrax. To study the effects, researchers would vivisect victims, cutting them open while still alive and without anesthesia. Organs were removed while the victims screamed in agony, their deaths considered an acceptable price for science. Other experiments tested the limits of human endurance. Prisoners were exposed to extreme frostbite by submerging their limbs in ice water, only to have their frozen flesh struck with blunt objects to observe how it shattered. In some cases, frostbitten limbs were left to rot, allowing scientists to study gangrene and its spread through the body. Unit 731 also used human beings as living test subjects for bomb and chemical weapon experiments. Victims were tied to stakes and exposed to grenades, flamethrowers, and poison gas. Others were subjected to starvation, dehydration, and forced consumption of toxic substances. Female prisoners endured particularly horrifying abuse, including forced pregnancies, to study the transmission of diseases to unborn children. The death toll remains staggering. It is estimated that between 200,000 and 300,000 people died as a result of Unit 731's experiments and the biological weapons it developed. Entire villages were decimated when plague-infected fleas, bred in Unit 731 labs, were released into communities. Equally chilling is the aftermath. After the war, many of Unit 731's perpetrators avoided prosecution. In exchange for their data on biological warfare, the U.S. granted immunity to some of the unit's leaders, including General Ishii. This decision has left a stain on history, as the victims of Unit 731 were denied justice, and their suffering remains a stark testament to the depths of human cruelty. 3. The MKUltra Project. During the height of the Cold War, the CIA launched Project MKUltra, a covert program shrouded in secrecy and driven by paranoia. The goal was chilling: to master mind control techniques that could turn enemies into puppets or extract secrets from unwilling subjects. What followed was a harrowing tale of psychological manipulation, unethical experimentation, and ruined lives. MKUltra's methods were as horrifying as its objectives. The CIA tested psychoactive drugs, particularly LSD, on unsuspecting individuals to study their effects on the mind. Some victims were lured into experiments under the pretense of clinical trials or therapy, while others had no idea they were part of any experiment at all. People were dosed with hallucinogens in public settings, with no warning, leaving them to endure terrifying episodes of confusion, paranoia, and psychosis. In one notorious case, a man named Frank Olson, a CIA scientist, was covertly dosed with LSD by his colleagues. Olson spiraled into a severe mental breakdown, and 9 days later, he plunged to his death from a New York hotel room under mysterious circumstances. The official explanation was suicide, but allegations of foul play persist, with some suggesting he was murdered to silence him about the program's dark secrets. Other experiments ventured into even more unsettling territory. At facilities like hospitals, prisons, and universities, participants endured prolonged sensory deprivation, forced drug overdoses, and electroshock therapy, all aimed at breaking their minds to study how to reprogram them. Some were subjected to repatterning, where their memories were wiped through repeated doses of electroconvulsive therapy combined with heavy sedation, leaving them in a childlike state, unable to recall their past lives. The program also exploited vulnerable populations. Prisoners and patients in psychiatric hospitals became unwilling guinea pigs, often unable to consent or even resist. In Canada, psychiatric patients under the care of Dr. Ewan Cameron, a prominent MKUltra contractor, underwent terrifying experiments involving weeks of forced sleep, constant drugging, and repeated auditory indoctrination. Many left these experiments with severe psychological damage, some unable to reintegrate into society. When MKUltra was exposed in the 1970s, the sheer scale of the operation shocked the world. The CIA destroyed most of the program's records in 1973 to cover its tracks, but surviving documents reveal that at least 149 subprojects had been conducted. The true extent of the damage remains unknown, as many victims never knew they were part of the program. 4. The slave experiments of Marion Sims. Dr. J. Marion Sims, often referred to as the father of modern gynecology, built his reputation on a foundation of medical advancements, but also on horrifying experiments conducted on enslaved women. Between 1845 and 1849, Sims performed surgeries on at least 12 enslaved women without anesthesia, exploiting their lack of autonomy and subjecting them to unimaginable pain. Sims was attempting to develop a surgical technique to repair vesicovaginal fistulas, a painful condition that can occur during childbirth. While this procedure ultimately became a significant advancement in women's health, its development came at a horrifying cost. Enslaved women like Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy, whose names survive in the historical record, endured repeated surgeries without consent or pain relief. Anarcha, in particular, suffered more than 30 procedures as Sims honed his technique. The surgeries were brutal. Without anesthesia, which Sims claimed was unnecessary because he believed black women experienced pain differently. The women screamed in agony while being restrained by assistants. Sims later admitted that Lucy nearly died from sepsis after one procedure, a complication he caused by using a sponge that had not been sterilized. Adding to the horror was the racial and social context. These women were enslaved, meaning they had no legal right to refuse participation. Their owners lent them to Sims under the pretense of medical care, treating their suffering as a business transaction. Sims' justification for his actions was rooted in the racist pseudoscience of the time, which dehumanized black individuals and dismissed their pain as irrelevant or exaggerated. While Sims' techniques eventually led to significant advancements in gynecology, he never acknowledged the humanity of the women who suffered for his research. Instead, he focused on using anesthesia only after refining his method on enslaved women, when he began operating on white patients. Today, Sims' legacy is deeply contested. Monuments honoring him have been removed or recontextualized in many places as awareness grows of the atrocities he committed. The stories of Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy stand as haunting reminders of how medical progress can come at the expense of human dignity and lives when ethical boundaries are abandoned. Their suffering underscores the critical importance of informed consent, compassion, and justice in medical research. 5. Project 4.1. Project 4.1 was a secret U.S. government medical study conducted after the detonation of the Castle Bravo hydrogen bomb on March 1, 1954, at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The bomb was the most powerful nuclear device ever tested by the United States, and its explosion was nearly 3 times more destructive than predicted. The fallout from the blast affected not only the immediate area, but also inhabited islands over 100 miles away, exposing hundreds of Marshallese people to dangerous levels of radiation. What followed was a deeply unethical experiment disguised as humanitarian aid. The U.S. government initiated Project 4.1 under the pretext of studying the effects of radioactive fallout on human health. However, instead of providing proper medical care and protection to the affected Marshallese, the project turned them into unwilling test subjects. These individuals, including men, women, and children, suffered severe radiation burns, hair loss, nausea, and long-term health issues, including cancer, thyroid disorders, and birth defects. The radioactive fallout contaminated food, water, and the very soil the Marshallese relied on for survival. Despite knowing the extent of the contamination, U.S. officials allowed the Marshallese to return to their home islands prematurely, exposing them to prolonged radiation. Researchers documented their deteriorating health over years, but provided minimal treatment. The participants were not informed of the true purpose of the study, nor were they warned about the risks of their continued exposure. One particularly horrifying aspect of Project 4.1 was its impact on children. Many were born with severe deformities, stillbirths increased, and survivors of the fallout reported the tragic phenomenon of jellyfish babies, infants born without bones or with severe malformations. These heartbreaking outcomes were meticulously recorded by researchers, but little was done to alleviate the suffering of the people involved. Project 4.1 was classified for decades, and the Marshallese people were kept in the dark about their role as human guinea pigs. It wasn't until years later that declassified documents revealed the full extent of the U.S. government's actions. Even then, the affected communities struggled to receive justice, adequate compensation, or proper medical care. The story of Project 4.1 serves as a grim reminder of the human cost of nuclear testing and the exploitation of marginalized populations in the name of science. For the Marshallese, it left a legacy of suffering, displacement, and intergenerational trauma, one that underscores the profound ethical violations committed in the pursuit of scientific knowledge and military power.